All right. So I know we have another speaker already on the call. Renee, welcome. Uh, do you unmute yourself? And
Thank
hi, I
you,
can see
Lena.
you.
How are you?
How are you? I'm
Good,
very well.
thanks.
How are you?
Good, thank you.
Good. So thank you so much for joining us. It's a very, very special day today. It's International Day of a Girl Child. It's also Ada Lovelace Day, the day after tomorrow on the 13th. So we are so excited to have you once again join us and support one of our programs. Thank you, Renee. And I am obviously very excited to have you again. And everyone, please meet Renee. She's a criminologist, AI ethicist, and she's been in the industry for a long time. She has already been part of our program before, and once I heard you speak, I wanted to hear more of you and everything you have to say. So it's over to you, Renee. You have about 45 minutes, and then we will have a lots of questions for you as well.
Thank you very much. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be with you again. I really love the work that this organization is doing, Teens in AI. I think it's an absolutely brilliant initiative, what you're doing to engage more and more young people in the world of artificial intelligence and to bring them face to face with the future and to create the opportunities that are required. So, of course, today is a big day. It's the International Day of the Girl Child, and it's a wonderful day to be with you. It's an extraordinary moment for us to celebrate the work of women, and particularly the work of Ada Lovelace. It took the world about 100 years to recognize her work, and I think what Teens in AI is doing, and by inviting such brilliant speakers to this virtual platform, is to ensure the work of women is heard, particularly on this day. So let me just tell you a little bit about myself. As Elena said, I'm a criminologist, a criminal psychologist. I also specialized in therapeutic jurisprudence. And now I've been doing work as an AI ethicist as well as work as a data activist. So data activist is pretty much a new title, and it's a residency that I assumed over the last few days with the University of Virginia. And the work of a data activist is really to look at how data is being used in society and to look at the impact of that and to ensure that there is a requisite level of diversity and inclusion and equity, and ensure that everyone in society is allowed to benefit from how data is being applied, as well as to understand the negative impacts that data could have in society as well. So my journey into AI is not your usual journey into the world of STEM. I actually began my career as a journalist, and that career in journalism led me to broadcasting. And I spent a few years in broadcasting. I was actually a sportscaster, and then I got involved in the world of media and communications and public relations and government relations. And that was pretty much the flip side of journalism. And that journey took me into the field of psychology. And for many years, I worked as a psychologist in the court system in New York City, in Manhattan, where I live. And that love for psychology and for using the law in a therapeutic way, because I worked in the realm of rehabilitation, led me to criminal justice and criminology and criminal psychology. And I spent the last 15 years in particular looking at violent crime and how violent crime impacted communities and how violent crime impacted young people, and looking at things like youth violence, gun and gang violence, homicide, violent crimes against children and women. And I spent really a lot of time in that realm, training law enforcement officers on how to investigate crimes, how to solve violent crimes. But something really impacted me while I worked in criminology, which were the statistics, the homicide statistics. And I think a lot of people look at statistics as homicide, a death, someone died. But I always look at the intergenerational relationship of a number and how that one individual who has been murdered, how that death impacts so many other lives. And that love for numbers and really understanding what rests behind the data, the emotions, the value system, the futures that rest behind the data, the tragedy, the trauma, all of these things really sparked my interest in AI. And I got my foot in the door in AI from a risk management perspective, because much of what I do in artificial intelligence is about risk management. It's about detecting and mitigating risks that enter the data sets, risks that find themselves into the design and the deployment of AI systems, and managing those risks, and actually deploying alternatives. And one of the alternatives that I deploy when it comes to a risk management strategy would be inclusive technology. So I advocate for inclusive technology to ensure that there is diversity and there is equity in technology, and there is also visibility of all groups, representation and amplification of all groups. So just a little background on how criminology and artificial intelligence comes together. You would realize that many of the AI systems and tools that are being deployed have a criminal justice fusion. Many of them are being deployed in the realm of policing, in sentencing, in corrections, and just in public safety and public security, just in that realm. So technologies like facial recognition, which is one of the most contentious right now, sensor technologies, technologies that do predictive analytics as it pertains to policing or predictive policing, big data policing, intelligence-led policing. And now there are many companies that are designing tools that are supposed to predict the emotions and the propensity and proclivity for criminality, many of them very controversial and very contentious. So one of the things that I've always said is that criminal justice, in particular criminology, must be the conscience of AI, because a lot of the big risks that we are seeing AI are happening in the realm of criminal justice. And you would understand that criminal justice is really about life and death. It's about your life, it's about your liberty, it's about due process, and really about those rights, civil rights and human rights. So I speak a lot about AI ethics and the fact that AI must be ethical, which means that any AI system we are designing has got to be not only diverse and inclusive and equitable, but it must always be accountable, transparent, explainable. It must be fair, non-discriminatory, and technology in particular, new and emerging technologies, data-driven technologies like AI must be fair. So as an AI ethicist, I advocate a lot for stakeholder engagement. I advocate a lot for communities having a voice, a collective voice in the development of technology. And you may have heard the term public interest technology, technologies that seek to protect the public interest, technologies that require public buy-in in the design and the development of those technologies. So I'm very passionate about AI. And on the flip side, I also do AI leadership. So I speak to organizations on how to adopt AI technologies, how to bring AI into their organizational systems, and how to ensure those technologies that they are using are ethical, and that organizations have a culture of ethics that really informs the work that they're doing. Why do I love AI so much? Because AI has the power and the potential to change the world. And we are seeing it happening right now. And we're seeing it happening more so because of COVID-19. And as we as a world try to negotiate and navigate our way out of COVID-19, what we're realizing is more and more industries are embracing AI technologies. Because one, we're seeing when it comes to communications, when it comes to retail, people are looking for that contactless experience. We're seeing healthcare, precision healthcare being informed by AI. We're seeing AI able to do extraordinary work when it comes to creating therapeutics and clinical approaches and engineering approaches, medical engineering approaches to many of the illnesses and diseases that we have. We're also seeing it changing the way in which the world communicates, in which we're engaging. Look, at this moment, we're engaging via this platform, Zoom. We're also seeing AI being used in ways to deal with climate change and flooding and smart cities and really reorganizing the world in a way in which the world could become more efficient and more effective. But where there is promise, there is also peril. Where there is reward, there is also risk. So we're also seeing that while these extraordinary advancements are being made in AI, we're also seeing that there are some people who are not sharing in those benefits. There are some people who are not sharing in that process of co-designing the future. So it is very important, the work that I'm doing, particularly as an AI ethicist and now as a data activist, to bring those underrepresented and unrepresented groups into AI. And this is why today is so important. When we think of artificial intelligence and we think of some of the risks that we have seen so far, in particular when it comes to gender, AI systems that are deployed in the human resource industry looking to recruit new talent, and these algorithms that really exclude women or people of color, or individuals with disabilities, or persons who may not have access or mobility. We've got to ask ourselves, how do we improve these technologies to make them more inclusive? So that passion, because of the power and the pervasiveness and the potential and the promise of AI, makes me continually advocate for the inclusion of more women. And much of the work that I do is really to ensure that there is more diversity, and that diversity is not always women. It includes not only gender, but race, as I said, disability, mobility, access. All of these things are very important. So when it comes to AI, and I'm really sorry at this moment, I'm having a little sinus issues here, but when it comes to AI, I want you to start to think about your role. And as we celebrate today, which is the International Day of the Girl Child, and as you celebrate Ada Lovelace, who is considered the world's first coder for the algorithm that she designed, and as I said, unfortunately, it took the world about 100 years to recognize what she did as a mathematician for science and technology and STEM in general. So you have a role to play as well, because today, and because of this program, and because of Teams in AI, you are face to face with the future, and you have an opportunity to stretch the imagination of artificial intelligence. What AI requires right now is multidisciplinary thinking that engages different disciplines. So I bring criminology, I bring psychology, I bring a bit of neuropsychology, I bring communications to it, I bring journalism, and I try to fuse all of this to keep me intellectually curious and to stretch my own imagination. So I'm asking you, how do you plan to stretch the imagination of artificial intelligence? Because what we are seeing so far is, although AI is doing extraordinary things, AI is also replicating and encoding some of those old biases, discrimination, prejudices, things like systemic racism are being encoded into some systems. And this is why AI ethics is so vibrant at this moment, because what AI ethicists like myself are trying to do is install those guardrails to ensure the requisite levels of protection when it comes to privacy and security, accountability, transparency, non-discrimination, and that whole drive to inclusion. What are you going to do to stretch the imagination of AI? The other thing that I want to talk about is advocacy. And I believe in our work as AI ethicists, as coders, as data scientists, no matter what your specialization is going to be, you've got to bring a measure of advocacy to the table. And when I say advocacy, I'm not speaking about protest, I'm speaking about courage. I'm speaking about confidence. I'm speaking about heart and passion. And that is another way to look at advocacy, because advocacy ensures that every time you move forward, you are also creating space for other individuals to enter. And that's what I want you to think about. How is your work going to improve this fraternity, this industry of data scientists and other technologists working in new and emerging technologies? And then you've got to ask yourself, how am I going to use this technology to make this world a better place? And that's not a cliche, that's real. And you've got to make this world a better place in real time, because you are the future, you are the now. And you've got to ask yourself, what am I going to do with this technology? So as you stretch the imagination of AI, as you ensure there's that multidisciplinary fusion, as you advocate in your work to ensure there is diversity and equity and inclusion, ethical technology, inclusive innovation, you also got to ensure that your work is making this place better. And you've got to do that. The other thing that I want you to take about is, how do you use this technology to lift people up? And I'm really serious when I say lift people up, because it is something that I have committed myself to doing. I have committed myself to ensuring more criminal justice graduates get into artificial intelligence, because so many of the technologies, the tools, the systems that are being deployed are focused on the criminal justice system. And we've got to ensure that we don't deploy additional harms to certain communities that have already been marginalized and victimized and alienated. What are you going to do? What are you going to do to lift people up with this technology, to pull communities forward with this technology? The other thing that I want you to think about is magic. Today is a magical day. Today is the International Day of the Girl Child. And I'm a girl child, and I have a girl child. I have a 17-year-old daughter. And it's about magic. And what you are going to do in your career as you move forward with artificial intelligence is you are going to create magic. And you have got to ensure that the magic that you create celebrates the history of the technology, the history of how the technology has been applied in best practice circumstances, the history of how this technology is being used to improve lives, the history of women like Ada Lovelace, the history of all the brilliant minds that have assisted in bringing this technology this far. So what's the magic that you're going to create? You've got to ask yourself that. And then change. We've got to always think about change. When I speak about making the world better, it's about changing the systems that need to be in change. It's about improving. It's about enhancing. It's about deconstructing, reconstructing. It's about rebuilding. It's about repositioning. You have the power to do that. You have the power to do that because you will be creating the magic that is going to co-design the future. And you are now face to face with that future that you are going to co-design. I also want to speak to you about data. And data is the lifeblood of artificial intelligence. And as a data activist, I deconstruct data because what we have come to realize is that many of the biases, many of the prejudices that slip into our data sets are now baked into those data sets because of the kinds of histories we have experienced as a world, from colonization to enslavement to oppression, to many of these systems that we are not proud of as a society, but systems that have brought us this far forward and systems that we have got to recreate and we've got to reinvent. And I want you to think about that. I want you to think about the data always that you're using and do the work that is required sometimes to dismantle that data and to ensure that even the approaches that you use when you're looking at the data sets, that you ask some questions. And it's what I call data consciousness. And it's what I call data vigilance. And it speaks to a particular duty of care that we have as technologists, as developers, as designers, as ethicists, as individuals who have been given a responsibility to co-design the future. So you've always got to remember duty of care. And duty of care is to ensure that the work that you do is done with a requisite measure of due diligence and an understanding of that do no harm principle. And then there's that concept of due process. And due process means we must ensure that people's rights are respected. We must ensure that people's rights are also protected. So I want you to think about that. I also want you to think about what is going to be your legacy with this technology. And legacy is critical to technology because all technologies have an impact on society. And those impacts could be positive, those impacts could be negative. So you've got to think, what is the legacy I want to leave with this technology? And while we want to design things that are going to change the world, things that are going to make the world more effective and more efficient, and things that are going to make the world faster, and things that are going to bring us face to face with the services that we want in real time. Remember the high percentage of individuals across the world who are yet to be engaged in the technology. The millions who may not have internet access, the millions of young women across the world today who may not know what their opportunities are going to be, who may not have the resources to create the kinds of opportunities they would like, who may not have the kind of access required to operate in a world of agency and to feel empowered. And sometimes, or most times, as technologists, as ethicists, as activists, as individuals who are going to create, we travel with that power. So you've got to always remember the privilege that you have to design or to engage in a particular technology and the power that you are going to have when it comes to design. And you've always got to think of design and ethics, privilege and power, and how are you using that? Are you using that to empower future generations, or are you using that to disempower future generations? Are you using that to democratize the technology to ensure a broad base can engage in it? Or are you using it to personalize the technology, which is also another form of exclusion? So I want you to think about it. I want you to really think about the kind of work that you are going to do. Also, think about where you are now and think about where do you want to go. This is an extraordinary program because it's giving you an opportunity to engage, uh, and to engage at an extraordinary level. But also remember that in our own lives and at this particular stage of our lives, there are many things that we have got to deal with, many things that we are also dealing with when it comes to our personal lives, when it comes to our families, when it comes to decisions that we've got to make in life, and particularly now when it comes to the fact that we're existing in a world that has been impacted by a pandemic. There are many things that we've got to think about. We know with this public health crisis, we also have a financial crisis that the world is experiencing. We know that Black, Indigenous people of color have been hit very hard by this pandemic. We know financially, we know health-wise. We also know that there is a mental health crisis that's also spiraling this pandemic. And yesterday we celebrated World Mental Health Day. So many times when we are trying to build our future and trying to understand what is going to happen for us, it's not an easy journey. It's not an easy journey. And this is why you have got to know that everything you need, you already have in you. And this is why it is so important also to participate in opportunities that offer you that level of mentorship and guidance. And one of the things that I try to do is mentor, and I do that right now through an organization that I'm involved in called Women in AI Ethics. And it's really about mentorship, and it's about holding each other's hands, you know, even virtually, to take each other every step of the way. So I want you to understand that sometimes in life, we have tough decisions to make, and we've got to be open to the experience. But you have got to also know that you are the experience as well. So if it is that there are other things or other barriers in your life that may be obstacles to really achieving the kind of success that you are able to achieve, it's really important for you to reach out. And one of the things that I want you to know is that I am always available to this organization, to anyone in this organization, to any of the young people, any of the teams who need to talk to someone, who needs a piece of advice, who just need to brainstorm or to just ask anything about your career. I'm here and I could be reached through the organization. So just to bring it all back, and then I know I've discussed many things. This is a brilliant moment for you. This is a great day. Artificial intelligence in particular is now getting more and more attention because of COVID-19 and because of the fact that we've got to come up with more innovative solutions to move this world forward, to protect our health, to protect our communities, to protect our societies, and really to rebuild and build back better after the impact of COVID-19. So more and more industries, I think just about every industry is embracing AI. So it's a great place. It's an extraordinary opportunity. It's a kind of career trajectory that can bring you an extraordinary amount of success. But I want you to think about the magic you're going to create. I want you to think about the ways in which you can combine multidisciplinary thinking to stretch the imagination of artificial intelligence. I want you to think about that concept of always being data conscious and being data vigilant, understanding the power that you will hold as a coder, as a designer of technology, as someone who creates a startup, as an entrepreneur, as someone who is just working in the realm of AI. You have a power, you have a privilege. You've got to use this technology to build societies up. You've got to use this technology to build your communities up. You've got to use this technology to create the diversity that is required, to encourage and promote that level of inclusion that is also required. You've got to also ensure, as you are co-designing the future, which is such an extraordinary responsibility, that you are making space. And that's one of the things that I continue to do, is when I get into a space, I try to create as much room as I can for more individuals who are underrepresented, unrepresented, who are not visible, who need to be there to enter that space. And it's about providing the level of confidence that they need and that little more courage that they need to bring them into those spaces. So I look at life as a relay. And in a relay, it's about each of us taking a leg of that race and each of us reaching to a place where we pass the baton on. And it's very important. If someone in that relay drops the baton, the race can be lost. And the handing over of the baton is something that is very, very sophisticated and something that's very tactical, because that person is already moving with a particular level of speed, and you've got to put that smoothly and perfectly in that person's hand. And I think today that is my role. That is my role, to pass that baton on and to let you know this, as of today, you will be running that final leg of the race, or your leg of the race. And then when you reach to a particular stage like I've reached, you've got to pass that baton on. So I just want to say that I wish I could see all of you, which I can, but to let you know that you've been given an extraordinary opportunity. You've been given an extraordinary responsibility from this day forward. And as you build your own career, always remember the individuals who may not have the opportunity that you are having at that moment, and think of creative ways to use this technology to share that opportunity globally with all of the individuals who need to be empowered by this technology, who need to use this technology, and just go out there and create magic. And when it's all finished and you've left your legacy, all you've got to say to yourself is, I've done a great job, and I know that I have made this world a better place for the next generation. Thank you.
My goodness, Renee, this was so amazing. You made me cry, so I'm not going to turn my camera on. But I always get goosebumps when you join us. This is the second time, and last time just was not enough. You only had 20 minutes, and I thought this time it's never enough for me to hear you speak, because there is something so special about you. And I am so grateful, eternally grateful, that you have joined us as a keynote today. This is a very special day, a very special moment in the in times we live in as well. And we really do need to elevate more women and really passing that baton. When you were speaking about it, I felt like you were speaking to me, and I really hope that every single girl, every single woman out there that is listening to this stream, either now or after this stream, really hears that within herself, within her heart, that it really is we're speaking to them directly, in the same way as I've just heard you speak to me. So I am super grateful, Renee, that you've come to join us. It's a super special day, and having someone like you on a day like this is so important to me, because I know it will resonate with every single woman out there who's trying to break into this career. So we have got some questions for you, and the first one I would love to ask you is, a lot of young people, living in these really uncertain times, they don't believe in their ability to do anything. They would say, well, I'm only 14, I'm only 15. What can I add to this conversation on AI? What do you think can a young person at this time add to the conversation on AI? Why are young people's voices important in this?
Definitely, young people's voices are critical in AI, because, as I said, young people are the future, and the future is not just the now. It's just what's going to become. Young people have got to take the leadership role. And I think what young people are bringing now is extraordinary perspective. Young people are also bringing more of a respect for diversity and equity and inclusion. And because of how the world is changing and because of how young people are thinking at this moment, I think young people of this generation have some of the most brilliant minds, some of the most compassionate minds, and some of the most empathetic minds. And I think young leadership, those voices, combined with their ability to use technology, because anyone who's 14 or 15 or 16, 17 at this time, you were born into technology. You probably have never experienced a landline or a payphone. You were born into the time of a cell phone, of a computer, of TikTok and Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat. So you are technological just by the time in which you are born. And when you add that technology to the kind of thinking and perspective and ideas that young people are having at this moment, and the kind of diversity that I'm seeing among young people and their just natural easiness and readiness to embrace difference and to embrace diversity and to just amplify their own voices. I mean, it's brilliant. All you've got to do now is translate that by the kind of career path you take, the kind of studies that you take, and how you channel that. So I think young people, this generation, absolutely brilliant. And I think they have what it takes to lead us. And they've just got to step into that leadership role, knowing that, you know, individuals like myself and Teens in AI and all these other organizations have got your back. So I think they've just got to stand up and just push forward now, because they're brilliant. And I think I'm just blown away. I am blown away by the kind of leadership perspective, the kinds of ways in which young people are thinking about the world. We've never seen this before.
Absolutely. No, this is so important. And like Renee said, you are all so privileged you're participating in this program. I'm still racking my brains and trying to figure out how I can get this program to become available in, villages and towns, which don't even have basic infrastructure. They don't even have Wi-Fi. They don't have access to basic technology. I really, really want this program to be available in any part of the world for any young person, because it's so crucial. We, involve so many diverse voices into this kind of conversation. So thank you, Renee, for pointing it out and validating this. So we have some other questions, and one of them is on the history. How important is history when looking forward to a positive future with AI? That comes from a teenager.
That's a brilliant question, and I'll just share some of the work that I'm doing. So one of the things that I do as a data ethicist, an AI ethicist and a data activist or data ethicist, right, is I look at the history of data. And as I said to you, when I look at the history of data, I look at how data has been collected, how data has been classified, and how history has informed data. So if you look at the history of the world and you look at, let's say, Black, Indigenous people of color, and you look at something like colonization, and you look at how Indigenous people were treated historically, then you've got to ask yourself, how was the data that we're using now collected? So the history of data is critical to the data that we are using right now, because the history of colonization and oppression and all the types of suppressions and repressions that we've seen have found their way into the data. So as data ethicists, AI ethicists, data activists, what we are trying to do now is to push back and to find ways, technological, societal, educational ways in which we can now deconstruct data and take some of that negative history out of it. And then there's the positive history. You have someone like Ada Lovelace, who is considered the world's first coder, who wrote the world's first computer program, who had this brilliant mathematical mind, and who really was so ahead of her time and so ahead of her game. But because of history and because of how women, the work of women was not recognized pretty much until the feminist movement called call for rethinking of that. You see that it took 100 years for her to actually be recognized for her work. So history is important, and history is also important because you want to understand the history. You want to understand the history of technology, and understanding the history of technology makes us understand the kind of risks and makes us ensure that we don't want to replicate those risks. And if you understand your history, then you could always build a better future. So that's an excellent question, because you have got to understand the history of technology and its impacts on society, the positive and the negative, to build and design and deploy AI in a way that it does no harm and in a way that it's good for all.
Brilliant. We have a question on facial recognition and biases related to facial recognition. So there has been a lot of very interesting work done in respect to facial recognition. So what would be your stance? And there is a question from a teenager: can facial recognition be really biased?
Well, the fact of facial recognition and its bias is this, and much of the work when it comes to facial recognition. Now, there is facial recognition that uses biometric data, and we use it to get into our phones, we use it to access our computers, we use it for banking. We use it for many things, and that's important because it's an important technology. Where facial recognition becomes problematic is this deployment as a criminal justice or crime fighting tool. And that's where we're seeing the challenges, because the data sets that were used to train the algorithms, to train the AI model, were not diverse. And what we've seen with the technology, it is very questionable, it has overpromised, and it is very inaccurate when it comes to recognizing Black, Indigenous people of color and women in particular. So when you have a database that's not mature enough, when you're using this technology in a way that is to marginalize and to victimize and to recriminalize, and when the technology is designed with an imagination that comes from a place of systemic racism, then you have all of these biases in the technology. So you would see, particularly in the US, it's become very contentious. Some cities have already banned the technology from being used. Microsoft, IBM, Amazon have put a moratorium on further development of this technology, particularly in the United States, because of what happened with the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Movement. And you felt at that moment many of the big tech companies were realizing that they were supporting technologies that were really undermining social justice and undermining racial justice, so they pulled back on it. So while biometric technologies are important, facial recognition as deployed within the context of crime prevention and criminal justice, and really as a preventative tool for law enforcement to use, has proven to be way too immature as a technology. Because when you think of what we have seen right now, which would be cases of mistaken identity. In the US, we've already had several cases of wrongful arrest of individuals because of facial recognition. It comes back to when I spoke about duty of care and when I spoke about due process and your civil rights and your human rights. Facial recognition at this moment will undermine those rights that you most certainly deserve.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with you. And there is a TED talk that I will share in Discord on specifically on the topic of facial recognition by Joy. And I will ask that this will be a required TED talk that everyone has to watch today. So, and we do have another question from teenagers, and it's specifically also related to the ethics. Do you think there should ever be a boundary with AI?
Excellent question. There's got to be a boundary. So this is what's happening with AI. As with all technology, you would understand that technological development is always light years ahead of the laws that are required to regulate it. Also with AI, there's that question about regulation, or whether or not we should allow the market forces and competitive energies to allow it to develop. So there's lots of questions about antitrust and taxation and how do we regulate. Remember, technology can be used positively and it could be used negatively. And while it's being used positively for one group, it may also have a negative impact on another group. And this is why AI ethics is so important as a field, because AI ethics looks at questions such as diversity, who's being included, who's being excluded, equity. Is this technology equitable? Are we seeing equitable representation of groups and individuals and communities and industries in this? Is it inclusive technology? Does it include all of us? It also looks at privacy, and privacy is a major issue. Privacy is also linked to facial recognition, and they say in the world that we exist now, I think they say that every time we come out of our homes, our photographs are probably taken, or we're probably being featured on over 40 cameras. And if you live in the UK, it's probably more than that. If you live in China, they've deployed millions of cameras there as well. So you've got to think about privacy. Also security, and we know there are bad actors, and we know systems can be hacked. We've got to think about accountability. How accountable is this technology? Okay, you've got to think about explainability, because what AI does many times is you have an algorithm and you have a black box, and that black box is making a decision, and that decision needs to be explained. Because if this technology denies someone access to a particular school, or gives you a lower grade, or denies you access to a loan for a mortgage, or puts you out of the running for a job, there needs to be an explanation. And this is why I say the technology must do no harm. And AI ethics is built on that principle of do no harm. Ensure that you apply the requisite levels of due diligence to everything that you're doing, and ensure that you do not erode or trample over due process, people's rights. So AI, extraordinary technology, very powerful, very pervasive, has a lot of potential to change the world. Great rewards for society, but also great risks. And when you are designing, or you're developing, or you're working with that team, I want you to think about that moving forward. As we build this technology, what are we destroying with it? So, yeah.
Brilliant. And we do have perhaps one more question for you before we let you go. And this is, of course, a very, very important question for all of us, and related to diversity. How do you think can we use AI to promote diversity? Do you think ethics modules need to become compulsory in any computer science uni degree as a complement, as a sort of add-on to this question as well? But most importantly, how can we use AI technology to actually promote diversity?
All right, so I'll start with the beginning, but the end of the question is my beginning. I keep saying that AI is a new language. And with every language, you've got to be literate in that language, and you've got to learn the language. So I think when it comes to AI ethics, it's something that we've got to introduce at the early education stage, from the kindergarten stage, because young people, children, are coming into this world, and as they get into this world, they're on an iPad, or they're on a cell phone, or many of the tools, the toys that are being designed are coming with that element, their technological choice. So we've got to include AI ethics from the earliest stage of development. So it's a form of civics. It's a form of civics. So as you understand your rights, and you understand the Constitution in whatever country that you live, and understand how you are supposed to engage as a citizen, you need to understand AI ethics. Very, very important. Yes, more and more universities are ensuring that AI ethics is now as a discipline part of the curriculum for anyone involved in STEM, because in medicine there's biomedical ethics, in philosophy there's ethics, and in journalism there's ethics. So in AI, ethics is now being included. I was recently involved in the development and design of a new program that's being offered in Coursera that looks at, it's a certification that speaks to being an ethical emerging technologist, which combines everything that you need to know about AI ethics. So more and more you're seeing the industry asking for that certification to understand that new and emerging technologists, data scientists, developers all understand ethics. It is critical, because so far what we've been seeing is, yes, there's been some great work, but there have been some huge mistakes when it comes to AI, mistakes that have re-victimized vulnerable populations, that have re-victimized a woman, that has re-victimized Black, Indigenous people of color. And we're seeing that happening because of that lack of an ethical approach, or the lack of a culture of ethics of the organization, or the lack of an understanding. And how do we do this? We use the technology to create diversity. So there are ways in which we can design algorithms to ensure that if we're recruiting, it's diverse. If we're hiring, it's diverse, to send and to do public education and public engagement multiculturally, to ensure that we bring diverse voices and ideas and imagination into it. One of the other things that I celebrate a lot is what I call ancestral AI and indigenous imagination. And some of the work that I'm doing now around data and tragedy and trauma looks at the ways in which we've got to walk back into history and celebrate the work of the indigenous imagination. So much of the work that I'm doing will soon look at Native communities, in particularly Native American in the US, and Indigenous peoples and Maori people in New Zealand, and look at the ways in which data sovereignty is combined or infused with Native sovereignty in communities. So very, very important. AI ethics has got to be really spearheading the work that we do in the realm of AI, because what we want to do is ensure that AI is good for all. And that's how we've got to do it, by taking an ethical approach to this technology.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Renee. This was super helpful because we have got a lot of teenagers who are designing solutions in mental health, education, climate change, lots of really critical problems that they're trying to solve. And so it was so important that we heard from you today, one of the most incredible experts in the field of ethics. So everyone, we will be letting Renee go, but she did mention that you can reach out to her and ask her more questions or seek her support or advice. So we are very grateful, Renee, for your time today once again. I can listen to you for hours, but I know it's Sunday today. It's only, start of the day for you. So we will be letting you go. And once again, thank you for joining us on this very, very special day. It was a real pleasure having you with us today, Renee.
It's always a pleasure to be there. And to the young people, I just want to say you're absolutely amazing. You have everything in you that you need. And just go out there and co-design a world that you're going to be proud of. Thank you.